Like zoinks, baby, we're finally here! A good fucking Silent Hill game! So yeah, Silent Hill 2 Remake is finally here, and spoiler alert, it's really good. Speaking of spoilers, this video is going to contain some minor visual spoilers and minor plot overviews as well, but I'll try to keep these things as vague as possible. If you've played the original game, much of this is going to be the same, but there are a couple of new things for you as well. Either way, I'm going to make a lot of attempts to make this video safe to watch for anyone who hasn't played the game yet, but if you absolutely don't want to see anything beyond what was available in the promotional material, including review versions of the game sent out before the official launch, I don't know what to tell you. This video is going to be like 22 minutes long or whatever. With that said, let me take you on this magical journey through the land of sunshine and rainbows where nothing bad ever happens.
You gonna dance for me, big guy? I'd pay to see that.
Now tell me, do you have any money? I wanna spend all your money at the gay bar.
This remake, amongst all the remakes that have come out over the last like 5 or 6 years, is really awesome because I think most of these other ones reimagine the originals in ways that make them entirely new games slapped on with the same general story and the same name. And this is a game that really feels beat for beat just like the original. And yeah, we have some modern quality of life, like upgraded graphics instead of just being an HD remaster. The combat is now like a FromSoft Light RE4 mashup, and we lost the tank controls, but everything else you could want from Silent Hill 2 Remake is here. And listen, I have no prior experience with Bloober Team. From all the other reviews I've seen, people keep mentioning about how scared they were that this game was announced being developed by them, since it's really only Konami being the publisher for what being a publisher is worth when it comes down to development. So I honestly couldn't give a fuck about who was in charge of leading this project as long as it was good. And yeah, once again, I'm blown away by this game. In the ways it matters, this is an extension of everything from the original game. It's about twice as long. Many of the areas have not only been expanded, but have been expanded in ways that don't just feel like you're walking through empty areas for the sake of bloating game time so that Steam reviewers can justify spending 78 hours on a game that's like 15 to 20 hours on your first playthrough. With that said, there are some minor pacing issues here and there. I do feel like the game drags on a bit in certain areas, and I think the prison is an abominable experience that I really hated going through, with the exception of one of the characters' stories, but everything else, in my opinion, was really amazing. Enemies are faster, more threatening, you can get countered, enemies have super armor, the combat is rhythmic in a way that I felt Callisto Protocol really was, and I never really got bored with how good it felt to actually play the game. With everything added and stripped away from the original, some might say some stupid shit like, oh, the graphics are too good now, it doesn't feel like a good dream. This doesn't feel like Silent Hill. This dreamlike quality of Silent Hill was something that people really only appreciated once they finished the game and understood all the narrative elements, and it kind of retconned their understanding of the artistic elements in the game, like the monster designs or the, level designs. In actuality, what makes Silent Hill seem like this dream is just how strange the world is. The weird shit that we don't get answers to, the contradictions to character experiences and accounts, the fact that we have to solve these really sophisticated puzzles that have no business being in any real-world setting, with random pieces put into equally random areas. It's not really about the graphics that the game is built on. And let's be honest with ourselves, you couldn't release a AAA game in 2024 looking like a PS2 title. This just isn't happening and is more delusional than the main man James. I will say that in all the ways I said the original seems like a dream, those marks are hit here as well. You have characters running through these enclosed rooms and disappearing. You have characters progressing through or coming from areas that you have to solve these one-time puzzles for. The obvious contradictions in character accounts are still there, and arguably even more prevalent here than in the original. In fact, there's a whole scene near the end where one character comments on just what another character is going through. If this game wanted to make you feel like something was incredibly off with the things happening around you, I don't mean the fact that there are monsters around every corner and everything is fucking evil in this town. It's doing it in spades. I mean, how else could this little brat be running around this godforsaken hellscape unharmed when we, a grown-ass fucking man with a handgun and a lead pipe, are constantly getting the shit kicked out of us? This really just sounds like fans of the original finding things to complain about, and while there are some minor flaws in the remake, it's not like the original is some flawless masterpiece either. Alright, let me give you an example. Just listen to this line delivery.
Not very cute, is it? Here, James. You take it.
Thanks. Excuse me,
Oh, I'm sorry. I
No,
was
it's
just...
okay. I didn't mean to scare you. I'm kind of lost.
Lost?
I swear to God, this reminds me of how people grill on the Star Wars prequels. Like, Luke didn't just get over the death of his family in like 5 minutes after seeing their charred corpses, or how a room full of stormtroopers couldn't even hit a single person in a small crowd of people like on the Death Star. And to be honest, it's not even like those movies don't have a ton of movie tropes from the time they were made either. Don't get me wrong, the original trilogy is a collection of very good and very fun movies to watch, but if your biggest complaint over the prequels is Anakin complaining that he doesn't like sand, at that point I think you're just finding things to bitch about, and that's kind of how I feel here. People just finding things to bitch about the remake. Now, when it comes to what makes Silent Hill 2 great, I think the majority of fans are probably going to agree that it's the narrative and the aesthetic of the game. The story in this game is really great because unlike a lot of other horror classics, I don't think there's any classic literature that really captures all the same themes that Silent Hill does, at least not in the same ways that it does. And even in the gaming sphere, there's really only a small number of clones that even comes close to the success of Silent Hill 2. Thinking about how the aesthetic and narrative play into each other reminds me of a video I saw by Digibro a long time ago titled "Narrative is Aesthetic." And while I don't always think that's true, I do think it's true in this game. And what we get here is something that is both haunting and beautiful to look at. In fact, of all the modern horror games, I think this is the best looking, not only because it's the most recent release and it just holds up better in terms of fidelity, but also because it doesn't hold any punches with convincing you that you're in some abandoned ghost town in Maine, New England, where people just throw their shit anywhere. Of course, things like fidelity, the ability to play in native 5K, ray tracing, incredible shadow quality, and just everything in this game looks incredible. It's not a hard sell when something looks this nice. The meat and potatoes of this remake isn't just the graphics, it stands on its own just being a solid iteration of the original story and how central to the story of monsters and the character designs are. I'm not going to spoil the good stuff if this is your first go around with Silent Hill 2. If you want that, you're going to either have to play the game yourself or watch a lore video on YouTube, but the intent behind how well tailored these monster designs are for the story of Silent Hill 2 makes it inseparable from the locations James visits, from the fog world to the other world to just the actual town itself. Unfortunately, some of the later titles would reuse many of the same designs as generic hallmarks for the series, something Silent Hill 3 would try to step away from, but an effort that was eventually abandoned in later titles. Homecoming and the movies being some of the worst examples of iconic monsters, like the nurse being used in a setting that, for all intents and purposes, doesn't really make sense to that game outside of marketability. It would just be nice to see space for other monster designs in this franchise that aren't Sexy Nurse or Pyramid Head being shoehorned into the lore just as an excuse to continue using him. Scarlet in Homecoming was actually a pretty intense design that I felt worked for a game like Homecoming, and I wish the series didn't just try to iterate everything from Silent Hill 2 that made it popular. Eventually the train has to stop and you have to get off, and I think at this point it's time for a fresh design, and I hope that's something that we get in Silent Hill F. And while Bloober could have done that here too, making new monsters that just doesn't make sense for the sake of plot, I appreciate sticking to the original because everything already makes sense, and adding other monsters might have just muddied things without any type of explanation, while at the same time any explanation that they could give just seems like it's shoehorning itself into the narrative and dilutes what makes James's story so just disgusting and anxiety-inducing. We get to see the manifestation of other characters' versions of the town as they bleed into what James sees, or in some instances, doesn't. And that's all good here because this is what good storytelling is. This is what makes Silent Hill 2 a classic and an actual first of its kind. And yeah, sure, we have books like Crime and Punishment, Metamorphosis. Other times we have classic imagery inspired by artists like Francis Bacon, but the exact recipe of 11 herbs and spices that makes Silent Hill 2 really a first of its kind is to gaming what these other pieces of art and literature are to art and literature. And although I don't think James himself is a wholly unique character in terms of literature or just fiction in general, he's a character who's important within the major themes of Silent Hill. I would even argue that he's a definitive part of the larger narrative of not only Silent Hill 2, but of the series and franchise at large. We don't play as a character where we know what he did for work, how him and Mary spent their days together, if he preferred Parks and Rec to The Office. All we know about James is that he's moved beyond any of those things really being important in his search for his late wife, and the character we play as is a husk of a man who's being haunted by everything happening in Silent Hill. And this is really just me rambling on to say that this remake is creepy as fuck and beautifully depressing for what it is. I've beaten the game, and I can honestly say that there aren't a lot of instances in the game where the player gets much of a sense of reprieve. At all points, something's happening. The game is just a battering ram of violence, trauma, and terror to the point where looking at the game can be exhausting. This game just has this richness of horror that is really ever achieved, and something I had to play in sessions because honestly, it's just a lot to take in through long play sessions. Always being on your toes, always wondering if the monsters you killed stay dead when you revisit an area, if there's something waiting for you in the dark because you can hear the squelching and the skittering of just something beyond the bend or through these paper-thin walls. The feeling that something big and ominous is going to break through a wall unexpectedly while you do something as banal as picking up a piece to one of these obscure puzzles. This constant feeling of being timed, of being watched, of being chased, all is built up not just through the conditionings of enemies hiding behind anything they can fit behind. It's not even feeling like something should be happening in long hallways with a single source of light, but also the aesthetic of sound design and how booming and how close everything sounds. Now the sound design isn't flawless. Some of these themes are apparent when walking into an area with an abrupt music cue or soundbite that gets repeated in the exact same way every time you enter that room, and that can kind of kill the vibes a little bit, because it feels less authentic, like something is imminent and it now just comes across as, okay, I pulled away the curtains and now I see what's going on behind them, the jig is up. And there's a few places where this happens. Some of the anxiety is also lost in areas that you are repeatedly backtracking through while you search for some piece of a puzzle you're missing, once you actually realize that you're safe doing so. It can feel at times like the bit is milked dry, but I think a lot of this tends to be effective at least the first time around, and the game still manages to feel tense even in later portions of the game where you start to understand the patterns of when you feel like you're going to get attacked or ambushed. Somehow, even despite this, there seems to be new gimmicks where you're just not really sure how to navigate your expectations. And if you haven't played a lot of horror games in general, or honestly, even if you have played a lot of horror games just in general, some of these things are going to hit you very unexpectedly and be very intense. One such area for me was in the middle of the game. And I really just ended up not liking this portion of the game, but a lot of the reviews I've read online actually really seem to like this area the most, which really surprises me. I just personally didn't like this area very much because there's one room in particular that respawns enemies, and it was really hard to understand, you know, when enemies would respawn, and I didn't quite understand that this was a room with respawning enemies. I just thought there was like a lot of enemies that I was just running through because I didn't want to deal with things, but it seemed like every time I'd go back there was just new enemies, and I didn't really understand the gimmick until I just ended up using, you know, too many resources, and I don't know, I just kind of felt like this specific portion of this middle part of the game was just really annoying, for me at least. I can say that my time spent playing games like Dead Space, Callisto Protocol, Resident Evil, and just horror games in general that my spider senses have honed into this well-oiled machine of fuck around and find out. But as much as I was beating the brakes off of enemies in this game, I would still go into every new room thinking, oh shit, here we go again. And I'd just slowly open doors to see if I could scout out where I could anticipate being ambushed from. My heart racing anytime I jumped into a room from some open window, ready to just dodge, and just being on edge for even 10 hours into this game. Even after being in scenarios where I was fighting multiple enemies at once and still getting nervous over being ambushed by even just a single monster. And maybe this is just me not being very adaptable, but something about Silent Hill continues to be effective at making you on edge despite what obstacles you've already overcome to get to where you are, and I think that's a really good sign that the game is scary. Very similar to how you can tell a game is hard when you know what to do, but the execution of actually doing it is the part that's difficult. The horror in Silent Hill is equivalent to decision making in a game like Tekken or Street Fighter, both being effective at making the player be responsible for how they respond to whatever happens next. Much like the anxiety of finishing a block string and then having that anxiety cloud your ability to choose if the best option is to empty jump, shimmy and punish, block, or use a reversal. Now, I play a lot of fighting games, and usually in fighting games I'm a very calm and collected player. I don't really get in situations anymore where I ever question what my reaction to a situation is going to be, and a large portion of that is, you know, familiar with fighting games in general, just years of experience, and a lot of it is also familiarity with, you know, whatever game in particular you're playing, whether it's Tekken 8 or Street Fighter 6 or, you know, Dead or Alive 5. Much of it is just having a calm mind, but there are portions of Silent Hill where I felt like I was relying solely on my reflexes, and the familiarity with controls would sometimes go out the window when I found myself in situations of panic. And I think this is largely much of the intended experience of just horror games as a genre. No matter how many you've played before, there's always this question starting off in any new horror game of how the enemies behave, how lethal each of these attacks you'll be taking is, what resources do I come out on top with for, you know, that encounter and future encounters. And part of the journey of making your way through a horror game is your ability to keep a calm mind and treat it like a video game and not like it's a real life or death situation. And like I said, the hallmark of a good horror game is to know what mental state you need to achieve and still finding it difficult to do so. And Silent Hill 2 Remake is really, really good at making it difficult to find the proper rock to hold on to. Whatever your feelings are of horror games or to Silent Hill 2 being remade again, I think this is going to stand the test of time as the definitive version for a lot of new fans, and for a lot of existing fans, I think that this is going to be a solid iteration of Silent Hill 2. This remake, more than anything, is a love letter to the original while maintaining an adherence to at least a couple of modern sensibilities. And like all letters, there has to be an end. So thank you for watching my video, and I hope I can find you in Silent Hill.